Nice computer. All right, we're live. We're live. All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Agile Spain webinar series. So today we have a host that we have invited to talk about different things about product and Agile. Chris, thank you so much for being with us. Would you mind to give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. Really nice to be talking. So I started my career doing software development. So I haven't done it for a while. I know there's a lot of probably really experienced engineers on here, but I started. This is almost 20 years ago now. I ran a development company. We had at any given time 20, 30, 40 developers doing project work for different companies, and did some product development back then. And I did that for not quite a decade, but almost 10 years. And near the end of that that time period, I started to have the realization that the team and the software industry and everyone was getting better and better at launching things faster, right? Like SDKs were coming out and abstractions and APIs, and we were getting more and more efficient, which was phenomenal to see. Because you get faster satisfaction as a development team. The thing that started to irk me or concern me was I didn't feel personally that I was getting any better at understanding what to build. So how do I know building product A would be more successful than building product B? So I went as deep as I could on personas and need state analysis and learned sort of as much as I could about that space. And what I found was I felt like it fell a little bit short in terms of when you get to the engineering and the software development side of things, you have to make very explicit decisions and you have to make very explicit trade-offs. I can either do A or I can do B, or I can abstract and do some combination. We never really feel good about averaging, right? Yeah. But I need to make explicit trade-offs, and all of the customer insights and all of the learning that I was doing wasn't giving me concrete answers about whether to build A or build B. So I felt like I was making a little bit of progress, but I was like feeling my way around in the dark, and it didn't feel good. So at the time that I was having this struggle, I met a gentleman named Bob Mesta, who's done a lot of work on the jobs to be done framework. This is 2000, probably met in 2004, got to work on jobs around 2006, 2007. But basically he had a sort of basic framework for thinking about why people buy the products that they buy, and a basic framework for saying if we learn certain things, then we can make better product development decisions. At the time, jobs to be done was basically a footnote in Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma. So as Bob and I would do, he was actually a client of mine, I would do development projects for him. I would basically sit down and say, why is this the thing you want me to build? And he would have really interesting answers that sort of flew in the face of everything else that I was learning about customer insights. And so eventually I came to him and said, look, you've got to, I don't know what this thing is, but you've got to teach me what you know about it. And basically he said, look, it's early days. I'm the only one doing this. Clay wrote about it in a book, but there's nobody really working on it. So I left the software business. We started the Rewired group. And basically, with Clay's blessing, started working with clients on formalizing and popularizing jobs to be done. So we had a very basic language, a very basic way of thinking and talking to customers. And we spent about 10 years taking that down to the next level and really helping to popularize all that. And then during that time, I met Jason and Ryan and the guys at 37 Signals. They were one of our customers, which was like, if you can imagine kind of coming through software in the early 2000s, like the Basecamp guys had done this SaaS thing that people really hadn't done before. So they were like legends. I was a big Basecamp user, and then we got the call from them like, hey, come and hang out with us and let's talk about customers and stuff. It was the craziest thing. So had a lot of fun with them. And then became good friends with Ryan. So Bob is still running the Rewired group. I had my wife and I had our first child 3 years ago. She basically said, no more consulting, no more being on the road all the time, right? Which is the right thing to do. And so I'm now running product and growth at a company called Autobooks here in Detroit. And I'm having a lot of fun. And so basically, over the past year, Ryan has been writing Shape Up, and Autobooks I've been using sort of our team as the sandbox, right? So and I know we want to get into the details, we were in a situation where we're going cycle to cycle or sprint to sprint. like we're shipping things, but you have that feeling where nothing ships on time. It always drags from one sprint to the next sprint. There's a lot of loose ends. You don't get that satisfaction. And Ryan was coming at it from a different direction. So I said, let's try some things at Autobooks. And we've now basically fully committed almost to the shape up method. So it'll be fun to tell some stories and do some case studies.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. One of the things that I the reasons that I wanted to have you here is because you have a lot of, different things that you have learned throughout your career, jobs to be done. Now you're applying Shape Up at Autobooks. You have this thing that I love, which I don't know what you're going to launch another episode of Demand Thinking, which I really wanted to try to understand because that was a concept that I have never thought about it. I mean, you have heard about it, but in different ways. But I think that, that difference between demand and supply is one, is very clear on how you can articulate all the features of the request that, people are always ask you to build. So let's try to, let's jump into the mess. What is this difference, Chris, between demand and supply? How do you explain to people who are, who are into product or who are into Agile, who are, helping also product teams to become better?
Yeah, so basically we think of supply as anything that we build. So new products, new features, new capabilities, things that we can sort of put on the table literally or metaphorically in front of a user and say, are you willing to try this and use this, and will it create value in your life? So supply is anything that we can build and deliver, and demand is this elusive thing that we're always trying to understand, right? So demand is basically, how do we understand what people are struggling with in their lives and what their definition of progress is, and how can we unpack that to a level of detail that'll answer that question that I was talking about earlier. If I build product A, it's going to serve this demand and help people make progress, and they'll be willing to leave their current situation and basically switch over into this new product. Demand thinking came about, and we'll get into the details here in a little bit. Demand thinking came about where jobs to be done in its early forms and still today is a complicated framework to grasp, and it's still a difficult thing to execute against as well, right? So Ryan at Basecamp had done a couple of very deep jobs to be done projects there, and then basically came to the conclusion, like, I'm having difficulty socializing this. Some people get it, some people don't. There's different levels of interest. And he stumbled upon this notion of, if you take basically a feature request or somebody calling in and saying, look, I love Basecamp, but this one part of it, like, I could really use an upgrade here because it's not fitting my use case. We basically came up with a very, very lightweight way to understand demand that doesn't require hours and hours of customer interviews. And what we did is we took the customer request, which is almost always in supply side language, right? He uses the calendar picker. I need a calendar so I can see, and we translate that into demand. And basically what we do is we walk the customer back to the first thought that they had, that they needed that new feature. And we said, where were you? What was going on? What caused you to feel like you couldn't use the current capabilities of the tool? And then you also get an idea of like the benefit. So once I put this capability in front of you, how will you change things? You get them to sort of play things out into the future. So Ryan and I have been sort of playing in that demand thinking, demand language for a while on that podcast, trying to formalize that and create a tool that helps people think about demand that's not quite as heavy of a lift as jobs to be done. That makes sense.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of companies, a lot of teams that they think that when they think about demand is people asking for different things. Going back and try to understand specifically that moment in time when they need it. So that is going to give it's going to give them a lot of context of specifically about the story, right? So the story is going to tell you more or less. I don't know if that's okay, but understand a little bit more what they're struggling with, so you can come up with a better solution, or at the result is going to be better than if you say, hey, I need a calendar, and you build it and you don't even know what that means, right?
That's the problem, is that typically when we get input in supply side language, it almost always lacks the detail that we need to really build something. So Ryan has that great calendar example where they're hearing calendar, if you were to go build a calendar, there are 1,000 decisions that you're going to make about how to implement it on mobile and on desktop. And can I invite other people to meetings? And how do I see if a resource is booked and not booked? And I mean, it spirals in so many different directions, but you can see how we've gone from a very innocent conversation. Hey, can you add a calendar to this? Down this winding path of all the different directions that we can go to. And what I always say is we just need to develop a different muscle instead of, I just have this, this inkling, and anybody who's an engineer who loves to build things will know, we want to rush to the solution side, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I saw this new calendar module and it looks so great and I've been dying to use it, and we want to run to that. And then we end up grappling with all these trade-offs.
Yeah.
The muscle that we need to develop is instead say, okay, let's take a time out here. People use calendars a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different ways to implement it. Is this a one person scheduling their own time? Are there multiple people scheduling? Like, what is actually driving this? And what we find is if we spend the bulk of our time figuring out the demand or figuring out that struggle and definition of progress, we can really, really narrow the scope of what we need to build, which is really what Shape Up is all about, right? Placing the right bets and being confident that it's going to move the needle. And we can, what I found is we can get into situations where development and design teams can be much more satisfied because they're not in a situation where you're lobbing this loosely scoped epic story, sort of document on them and having them turn around and say, well, I can do this or this. And then you kind of throw up your hands, like build a calendar, right? I told you to build a calendar. That's just a horrible situation for product and engineering to be in.
Yeah. And then you end up wasting a lot of time as well. Because at the end of the day, when you're doing a lot of investigation, these kind of things, and you think that you found something, but then when you build it, you spend time building, and then the developers say, hey, why are we building this if we're going to throw that away? After we build it, and it's that resonated a lot because I did a couple of months ago an interview course with Teresa Torres. When I was doing that, that course, that training, she said that, that you try to find what the customer is struggling with or what is the problem the customer have, you need to try to tell them, to tell you stories about that. Because with that, and I think that resonates with, particularly when you're talking about the when, that is going to remove at least some of the bias that people have. As you say, for me, a calendar could be, the best calendar I ever used. That could be an application. For other people, could be the Outlook calendar. For the other people, could be any other thing in the world. So that is going to remove these kind of things, and you're going to start to talk about this particularly what, the situation that people are dealing with.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I'll try to make like simple terms. I never want to build the best. So we talk about the best. I never want to build the best calendar in the world. Yeah. I want to build the calendar that fits best for this specific situation. And the only way that I can understand the situation is by, and I like the way Teresa did it. It's like, tell me about when you were having a problem with that. And it can't be, well, if I had this calendar, everything would be amazing and it would all be great. And I would never have double booked meetings. It's like, tell me about the moment where you had the struggle and you thought, I need a better calendar. I got to get rid of this thing that I have, and give me everything leading up to that. It's kind of the only way to dive in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point. Do you have, for example, when you started to do this kind of, or apply this kind of thing out of books, how did you create that muscle to avoid thinking in this kind of, rushing into, building the solution and try to help people to understand that, hey, let's try to start thinking about more on the demand side a little bit rather than that.
Yeah, it's I don't know that everyone will have sort of the luxury to do what I did, but I started basically wholesale. So the way that Autobook started is a way that I think a lot of technologies start, and it's the right way to do things. We came in and we basically built a very a moderately wide set of features that address small business accounting needs, right? So we have a balance sheet, a general ledger, a little bit of payroll. You can send an invoice, get paid, keep track of all that thing. And like, we had basically a laundry list of features that a small business could be looking for in order to make progress with their business. So when I came in, my role was focused on how do I drive adoptions as quickly as possible, and how do I drive satisfaction up as high as possible. I went in and basically said, I want to talk to people who I can see came into the product and are satisfied users today. So I recruited, we did about 14 interviews. You only usually need about 10. but we went very, very deep. And what I did was I, got the small business on the phone, small business owner on the phone. And I basically said, you're using Autobooks today. You could be using it for any range of reasons, but tell me about what you were using before. Tell me about the business. What do you do? And take me down to that moment where you decided to give Autobooks a try and what you were hoping it would help you accomplish, right? And so the interesting thing is that we ended up going from a very broad set of features into something that's very narrow in terms of why people switch. So we went from this word accounting and bookkeeping, which to me has a lot of different meanings, to basically situations where people were saying, I need to invoice my customers, I need to get paid, and I need to keep track of who owes me money, who hasn't paid me yet, who's paid me, things like that. All of the other features that we had built had value, but they were all downstream. They basically said, if you could solve that sort of burning problem in my life today, I'll take advantage of all the tax preparation and accounting and things like that. But what it allowed us to do is basically reorder things, right? Marketing changes completely when you go from 10 bullet points down to one very succinct message. Product development changes completely when you go from a dashboard with every feature sort of equal weight to something where we basically say, we know why you're here. We'll show you all the rest of this stuff later. It's all there. Don't worry. But let's get that invoice out. Let's get you paid. Let's show how that money goes right into your bank account or your credit union account. It gives us the ability to sort of do that prioritization. Okay. So that was basically the first introduction that this team had to jobs to be done, but they quickly got a sense of, I say, like, once your feet are on solid ground, you know what it's like to be adrift, right? And then when somebody proposed, like, oh, we have this feature request, we're going to build this, everyone would kind of look around the room and say, do we really know as much as we need to know to go bite into that? Or should we go talk to some customers, talk to some users, and figure out the problem? So I think it's, for most teams, I'll say it's a time investment and a commitment to do. I mean, I spent about a month and a half recruiting people, right? Like, and it's not full-time work, but you got to build a list. You got to look through it. Are they really users? You got to reach out to them. Hey, will you talk to us? And then we spent 5 solid days locked in a conference room, scratching our head, talking to customers. It's a big commitment. If you can do it, you win over their hearts and their minds. If you can't do it, practicing the interview technique and at least getting into a little bit of a cadence of, we talk to 1 or 2 users a week about why they switched, and we start to understand that demand, like, little by little. I think it's possible to do it that way as well.
Right. So let me try to tie what you just said to another question that I have. The fact that you're using this kind of demand thinking to try to understand what the problems that the customer have, does that also inform your strategy? Because you also talk about prioritization and these kind of things. How do you relate those two things? Strategy with understanding the problems the customer have.
I think and you might have to probe, because in my mind it's all tied together, right? So we went and did research. We understood what was going to move the needle and what we needed to prioritize, both in our communication and in our product, in order to drive adoption. Because all of a sudden, like, the fog is lifted, right? We had a bunch of people who had adopted Autobooks and were using Autobooks, but we looked at the feature utilization, we looked at everything, and it wasn't telling us a story. So I look at 10 features and I say, where do I invest? I can just level all of these things up. And then I'm in a situation where it's back to what we're talking about. I need the best invoicing system in the world. I need the best general ledger in the world. I need the best tax preparation in the world. But I'm just spreading myself thin across all of these different things. So when it comes to product strategy, basically we looked at it and we said, we have an acquisition challenge, right? These are early days. So we had come in and we had done this, and we basically said, what do we work on the product development side that would have the biggest impact on early interactions in the application? So if our marketing works, we're going to get them to sign up. Based on the jobs and what we know about demand, how do we get them quickly to a place where they understand, yes, I had this struggle. I got some marketing from these people that promised to help me with this, and now I'm inside the application and I can understand how it's going to create value. So we started sort of very upstream in those interactions. And from there, we set a product strategy, and we said, these 7 features are really going to be not abandoned. We still need to maintain them, but they're going to be deprioritized in terms of our investments. These other areas of the application are going to get very, very pointy, and we're going to need to level them up and drive adoption up. And then, we spent a couple quarters actually doing that and achieving the results. And then we went down to, into activation. Are those first interactions really working? Are we getting everything we need to out of the user, and we're creating value? And then we march down into retention. Right now that we have them in, we got the switch, all those other things that they're interested in, the general ledger, the accounting things. Are we making sure that we're providing value there? It's really, from a strategy perspective, it's about what to say no to, right? Like, how do we,
exactly,
in a world where we have 1,000 ideas coming at us from every area, from our sales function to our executive leadership team, like, how do we get pointy enough with the consumer insight where we can say, look, guys, we know what we're doing. Here's our objectives. Here's the insight that we're standing on, and we can kind of defend our thoughts to the rest of the org.
Right. So, because one of the things that I was struggled when I was reading Shape Up, and I think that you also mentioned that in one of the episodes of Demand Thinking. So, it's how do you because in the Shape Up, for me it's lack of how the strategy works, because at that point at Basecamp, there's Jason, Ryan, and another people, 2 or 3 people, deciding what to build. And I understand that could work, for example, for a company like 60, 70 people. But if you want to have, like a large company, and then you're going to have, make a lot of decisions, that I don't want to say that doesn't scale, but it's very difficult to have 3 people to design the strategy for like a 1,000 employees. So I was really intrigued on how did you do it at Outbooks, with the fact that you're using Shape Up, but how do you use, how do you decide, the strategy of what you're doing then to try to say, hey, this is the bets that we're going to make. But these bets are basically, informed because of the strategy that we have decided on, I'll try to understand that process a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think the one caveat here is I don't know how to do it at 1,000-person company. It's definitely not my world. I go from 0 to a couple hundred, and then I go do that again. And God bless the people that are in those big enterprises trying to figure out product strategy. I think it's a whole different world. Yeah. I think at Autobooks, what we've tried to do a good job of, and I think we could do even better, but we are very intentional about communicating the jobs that Autobooks is hired to do by small business owners. So anybody that comes in gets a training session. I deliver that session myself every time people get hired, so they can probe in and they can really get the meat of all of it. And we make it clear that these are so we actually have 4 jobs that we serve. These are the 4 things that a small business owner may encounter as their business grows. When that happens to them, they're going to reach for Autobooks, and we're going to help them be more successful. And really, and even if you're in a support role, an engineering role, a sales role, to have that sort of underpinning and have that understanding of what we're actually out to do, not in a values perspective or a mission perspective, but from a customer perspective, it sort of helps inform everybody around the org about what the strategy is when the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
Right. Got it. So basically, it's like you try to communicate that to all the people, but you are basing everything on those jobs that you have defined at the beginning. That I assume that also aligns with your mission, vision, and so on.
Exactly. So that's one area that we haven't really touched on. Is there has to be at some point you have to reconcile what you've learned from the customers with where the industry is going, where the business is going, right? So one of the first things that I did is we came in, we did interviews, we did the analysis. I had one of the co-founders in the room during this whole thing, and basically we did a session on the side. I said, look, I'm taking us in not a dramatically different direction. It's not like we're going to go do cryptocurrency tomorrow and forget the small business. Yeah. And I'm gonna adjust our strategy a little bit. Is there anything that you know about our partnerships, our sales channels, the way we deliver our software, anything about the investments that we've taken and what the board expects that I'm just in clear violation of, right? Because the last thing you want is just that sort of tension. I guess I kind of got lucky. There wasn't a lot of tension in that. We were able to go sort of sell that across the various channels and people that needed to be informed. But I think you highlighted something, right? You can't just have a conversation and all of a sudden, whipsaw into some new direction.
Exactly. But yeah, because I was thinking, let's suppose that you have four different jobs, right now. We know that customers change their behavior. We know that, now they're using your product in some certain way, but then they may switch for any particular reason. What is the cadence that you have to try to review if those jobs still applies to, for the behavior of your customers?
We do. So what we try to do is a yearly refresh. So basically a deep dive into, is there anything new, just as sort of a safety mechanism?
Mm-hmm.
We usually don't find much. So the other thing that we do is at least once or twice a week, product manager will be talking to customers. And we're basically bucketing those. We're saying these are close enough to one of the 4 jobs that we'll slot that in, or we're setting it off to the side and saying, somehow we ended up with a customer that had expectations that we're not aware of. And then we get to have, it's another strategic conversation, right? Is this something that we should be good at and we need to go address? Is it something that we're clearly not good at and don't want to be good at for, any myriad of reasons? The competitor is really great, we're not going to go, and which case we need to go adjust our marketing because we're messaging to people that we're good at it. We've sort of mixed that signal up. But to get into that regular cadence of constant interviews and then pushing that knowledge back across the organization is sort of how we stay on track, and I think a lot of it is continuing to build confidence across the team that it's not like we locked ourselves in a room and came out with this cockamamie idea.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I think one of the most exciting moments about all of this is demand is so elusive. Like even when Ryan and I talk about supply and demand, I see people scratch their heads, and even he and I sometimes get in these weird conversations like, do we really know what the hell we're talking about? To get off a call, and this happens probably like once a month, once every 2 months, I'll have somebody just like run into my office and say, you will never believe it. Like one of the jobs is I'm trying to accept credit card, right? I've been getting paid cash and checks and things like that, but my customers are bugging me. I need to get, credit card.
Yeah.
And I tried PayPal and I tried Square, and like they held my money for way too long before they deposited my bank account, or I had some kind of customer support issue, and I'm sort of scared of that stuff. We'll hear, so that's a job. And then I'll have people bolt into my office. They're like, you will never believe, we heard almost the exact same story as those 5 other people that we heard, when we did the research the first time around. And it's like, when you find the demand, it always sounds like an outlier. It always sounds like something weird. And then you just hear it over and over and over again. And it creates the feeling on the team. 1, we're not just making this stuff up. We are listening to customers and they're telling us the real stuff. And 2, they're not one-offs. Like there's a big population of people that all have the struggle, and we're going to continue to hear it. And I think that's where people get excited about the strategy, excited about what we're building, and you get that constant validation. Because the first time we heard it, it was a doctor in a doctor's office. And the second time we heard it, it was an architect running it. And it's like, okay, it's wide enough, it's big enough, it's exciting enough to go tackle.
Yeah. So that's remind me another thing that Teresa said about that. When you created this habit of continuous interviewing, it's like one of the Keystone habits. So that is going to help you to build another set of habits that is going to help you to understand a little bit more what the customer want. And then is going to help you to try to find, different opportunities. So you will see, for example, different scenarios, that those scenarios will lead to, different solutions, and that, different solutions might have different, results. But then you will be able to try to understand, hey, maybe this solution is better than the other one, or we can spend, this time, or this is going to have more impact. This result is going to have more impact than the other one. So that is one of the things that I think resonates a lot. I mean, creating this habit of continuous interviewing and trying to understand, listen more to the customer is gonna help you to build other, healthy habits when you're trying to build, things more on the demand side rather than on the supply side.
I think you've nailed it. And the other thing that's important is that it marries itself nicely to the shape up method.
Yeah.
Because we don't hear something, immediately come up with a solution or our first great idea and throw it into a backlog or on a roadmap, right? Because we've decoupled the shaping of ideas and the development cycle. More often than not, I have a product manager do an interview with a customer and sort of scratch his head and say, wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard that stated that way. He goes and talks with our head of support. Have you heard this before? And head of support says, yeah, like not exactly, but similar. Here's a couple of customers and a couple of ideas. But the product manager is free in time to go explore that, right? So there's nobody sort of marching up to his desk every Wednesday saying, what's the next card? What are we going to do? What do we need to figure out? He has, at least I'll speak for myself, at any given time, I have like 10 to 15 things in what we call the hopper that I'm just listening for when I talk to users. And to your point, I heard it once one way, I heard it another way, and I'm starting to build up like an idea of what the demand is and how we might solve it. But it's under a different time scale. It's not like, it's Thursday today. It's not like the CEO is going to come to me tomorrow and say, what's the solution? Because, we heard something and we need to solve it. There's just a different spirit to it.
You touch another, another point that I wanted to talk about, which is this kind of obsession with roadmaps and backlogs. And a lot of the things that I love about ShapeUp is there, it describes so many counterintuitive ideas that you can say, hey, this is never going to work. But then when you see and you start to, pray to that, and all the people understand and say, hey, they might not be a bad idea. So one specific point, and then I want to dive into the question, but one specific is, hey, if you ask people how long is it going to take to build these kind of things, they're gonna come up with different things, story points, story whatever. Still, we don't have the idea. There's uncertainty on that work. But the fact that you wanted to ask the question in a different way, hey, how much we want to spend on that? How much time we want to spend? When you change the question, and I did that a couple of times, people don't know how to react. I don't know how much we want to spend. So you don't even know, you don't even know how much money you want to spend on that. So why do you want me to tell you how much that it costs? To do it. But going back to the question of the roadmaps, I heard that, I just got the quote from Ryan from one of the tweets, which he said, the roadmap turns opinions into obligations, shaping and betting preserves optionality. When we shape and bet, every 6 weeks we get to choose the best option instead of being forced to tackle the most important obligation, right? So could you elaborate on that? Because that idea of no backlogs, when I tell that to the Agile people, they say, whoa. What are you talking about? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So on the product development side, I think that this all gets back to our conversation about strategy and our conversation about how do I always make sure. So I have very talented engineers and very talented developers on the team here. How do I always make sure that they're spending their time building the thing that is going to drive the business growth the most? Right. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I've always struggled with is the way things flow through time. So today we're in January, it's Q1 here, right? Mm-hmm. I get a great idea. Everyone piles on. This is going to be amazing. This is going to help us. But we have a roadmap. We have stuff that we're doing in Q1 and the engineers are working on something. So I say, okay, put it at the back of the roadmap. We're going to do this priority one in Q2, right? Let's start it in April. The problem is as time goes through, April comes and we always end up looking at this thing and scratching our head and saying, it was January 16th, 17th. We had this idea. We were really excited about it back then, but our business has changed dramatically over the last 90 days. Why did we think that was so exciting? And why is this the thing? And then we end up sort of going to battle and going to bat. Well, shift the roadmap. It's just a roadmap. And then we do, and I prioritize the thing that I think is more important. And then the head of sales calls me and said, You've been talking about this for 90 days. I went and told all of our customers that this important thing was coming because it was the hottest thing in your mind. Yeah. And now what do you want me to do? I'm going to burn the deals, or I got to go placate those people. And I say, well, I don't want to work on the thing that's not important, but I don't want the customers to be upset either. And it gets us just into a bind. I think it's a luxury not to have a roadmap. I think in many, you're in enterprise sales organizations, it's almost like you have millions of dollars on the line and you're going to make the commitment to deliver the feature or you're going to lose the deal. You're going to need to have some commitment to it. I think it's the nature of the beast. Yeah. But to get out of that, if you can get out of that situation, get out of that mentality, you're in a situation where the best ideas are always rising to the top, right? So right now we have probably 15 to 20 well-shaped and de-risked ideas that we can bet on. So our cycle will end February 14th, something like that. And we're all going to get around the table and say, at some point we thought all these were a good idea, given the nature of our business and what we're facing and where we think growth is going to come from, what our biggest challenges are, what are we going to put in front of the engineers and devs and make sure that they knock out of the park. So we always have those options to be able to shuffle things around and say, now is the right time for this project.
Yeah. One of the things that I also try to tell people is that you're going to have different levels of bets, right? So some bets will have. I like the idea of John Catrick. He has created this kind of ladder of different bets depending on the things that you have to do. Sometimes there's no other way. It's like a no-brainer. You have a change in the law. You need to deliver that feature. There is no way, no discussion at all. So you have to deliver that. But that's going to be like more like a safe bet. But depending on the of the uncertainty that you have, hey, try to improve this metric, try to achieve this particular outcome. Depending on that is how much uncertainty you're going to have, and you have to balance to try to at the same time you're going to have different levels of bets, right? So depending on the ones that you have is the one that you need to all right, this is something that I have to do because I have to do it, and the other ones that you can say, hey, what are the things that we want to do, and then let's try to shape that a little bit. And then, as you said, in the next betting table, we discuss it and we put it and we do that.
I think that's perfectly stated. The thing that I'm really always struggling with is why, as product people and as engineers, do we always have to feel like we're behind and that we're letting people down and that we're not being successful? It bugs me to my core. And when you said there's a change in the law, I had like the visceral reaction to it, right? Yeah. We all went through the GDPR thing. And all of us were in a situation where we had made all of these promises on the roadmap. And then someone came in and said, yeah, but by the way, you need to get all of these new interactions in place or you're not going to be GDPR compliant. And now I've made all these promises, right? And now I'm looking at my engineers and I'm saying, I hope you don't have plans this weekend or next weekend. We're gonna double down. We got to get, we're shipping everything on the roadmap, and we also have to ship this new thing. And it's because we removed optionality. We got so far ahead of ourselves, and we were so confident that all of these bets in this order were going to play off, that when the black swan came in and hit, it's all on us, right? Product manager feels terrible. I don't have time to think through the solution. I just got to get this out. Engineers are upset because I'm not doing my best work. I'm throwing this stuff across the finish line because I'm working double time to get it all done. And so I'm constantly thinking, how do we not get ourselves into that situation? You've got talented developers and talented designers. How do we always put them in a situation where they get to say, I'm focused, I'm uninterrupted, I'm working on the things that I know are important to the business because I've watched these things get shaped. And then I'm driving towards an end date, and we're going to celebrate when that end date comes, and we will have moved the needle, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. And we're not feeling like, oh, we blew the deadline and everyone's upset with us all the time.
Yeah, I think that we also, we have this idea that everything is important just because it's in some kind of backlog. I think that the backlog also creates this illusion that everything that is in there is very, it's very important, and because we have a backlog, we have to do it. But I think that also we like also the success theaters, and we want to get this sense that we are doing a lot of things, and a lot of people still think that the more you ship, the more success you have, and sometimes they're not understanding that the other way around is this is the typical thing. Hey, if you wanted to provide value, I would rather have one thing that provides value that five things deliver five or ship five things that we don't even know if that's going to be useful or not, right? But we like that thing of busyness,
Yeah, I think that's one interesting thing. I think Ryan was wise and very explicit to leave jobs to be done out of shape up, right? You don't want to settle one good method with something that's really complicated. But the fact of the matter is if we're going to sort of take a measured approach to delivering new features, we need to have some level of confidence that it's going to provide value, right? The lack of confidence, I think, drives us into a position where we need to be throwing a lot of things at the wall because we're in the iteration mindset, we're in the MVP mindset. Like, let's just get a lot of things out there and let's put a lot of supply on the table and see what the demand reaches for. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that one at a time. If I go to you and I say every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, we're going to sort of try something, you're going to say, well, how many? We only get a couple of those a year. Yeah. And then 12 months has gone by and we will have iterated maybe to one thing. So this is where it constantly gets back to supply and demand. I want the developers and designers that know how to deliver always working on something that I know is going to move the needle. And I want to be able to leave them and say, guys, I'm going to go scratch my head for another 6 weeks and talk to users for another 6 weeks and really do the shaping so that I can bring you something else that I'm confident in so that you know you're working on something important.
Yeah, but at that point, what you said before, right? At that point, job is basically inform you what you're chasing, right? So that is the main indicator. I don't want to say the North Star, but it's the main indicator of the thing that you sometimes you need to work on, right?
That's it. And I think without, and I should get, jobs is not a silver bullet. There are other good frameworks out there to understand demand and understand what consumers want. But I think unless you have a method in product development that gives you some confidence to say, I'm willing to actually bet 6 weeks on this and I'm going to leave these people alone and let them deliver. Shape up is just it's a tough thing to grasp. The bets feel too big, right? Like it's too much of a commitment because I don't know if this is actually going to be successful. Jobs has been, at least for me, the way to go do that work and come back and say, I'm confident that people are struggling with this, and I am excited for the day we get to put a solution in front of them because they're going to love it.
Got it. But at the same time, I imagine that while you're doing this kind of building, we are talking in the shape up terminology or jargon. So you're building, but at the same time, you have people who are shaping new things. Are the same people who are on the building the things, or you have separate teams, one doing the shaping and the other one's doing the building?
They're separate teams. So at Autobooks, and that's probably different at different organizations. At Autobooks, I have a handful of people who do shaping. So I have a couple of product managers. Our head of growth is actually an engineer, really talented engineer that understands jobs and strategy really deeply. So he does shaping. And there's a couple other people that sort of head up functions that can identify struggle and can shape up projects. The people that play sort of wear both hats are the product managers. So they will do shaping because it's their job to research and kind of guide the product. But then when the cycle starts, they read their team into the bet that we're placing and they will ride along with that project. So during that 6 weeks, they're not 100% free to go research the next thing. They're there to answer questions when the devs or designers come back and say, I'm not sure what you mean by this. Can you explain it and give us a customer story or something like that? So they're sort of marching through the projects with the team.
But have you struggled with because one of the things that I learned, and maybe Basecamp is like an exception to any company that I've seen at least. But for me, I understand that you have talented engineers, very good people, but in those 6 weeks, there are a lot of things that are going to come up that these people might not be aware of. They need to clarifications. I found very difficult to leave them, like 6 weeks, go figure it out. You need to have very, very strong, and I don't want to say senior people, but you need to surround, at least if you have some people who are starting to work on this, you need to surround them with other senior people who know how to deal with these kind of things. So at least with the unexpected things that are going to happen during those 6 weeks. Have you faced that problem? Or?
Absolutely. So I think you're right. I think Basecamp is a very unique place. My understanding is they have an incredibly stable code base, right? They've been very diligent. They don't have, at least everyone has technical debt, but they've been able to contain that. Yeah. I think if you look at most VC-backed startups, it's not the case, right? We are racing to deliver new features, and we're making trade-offs. And that, it's not good or bad. It's just the reality of it. We're under a tight timeline. At Autobooks, we have what's called the core team of engineers who are chief architects, senior developers, and basically their primary role is to provide guidance to the teams that are executing on projects. So that comes in two forms. When I'm shaping something up, I'll have the demand, and then I'll start to work with a designer or another product manager, and we'll do breadboarding, and we'll start to come up with supply side ideas. And that's when I start pulling in the core team. It's a handful of individuals, and I basically say, help me with the risk. I think that I could draw a boundary here in the code or in the application. Does that work, or do I have tentacles sort of flowing through it? Is there anything you could see about this that our developers are gonna trip over? That usually gets us about 75% of the way there. The other 25% is in the cycle when the developer is actually writing the code, and they're pulling those people in and saying, hey, I need an hour, a half hour. Can we pop the laptops open? Because I don't quite understand this store procedure or this part of the database. You need to help me out there.
Right. And based on that, in ShapeUp, you have this kind of like a pitch. I mean, other companies have like one pagers, this sort of thing to try to, explicit the most important points. So when you're betting on something, for example, things that you want to know, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, what is the solution, what is the, how do you know that I succeeded after I ship that thing, or what is the thing that I expect to see? Yada yada. Could you, explain a little bit, or how do you frame that particular pitch, or if you have created, for example, some specific categories, especially for your situation or your context?
Mm-hmm. I think so. It has, and Ryan does a decent job of explaining. He does an incredible job of explaining this in the book. So I think basically we want to do a good job of at least introing the project and why we're focusing on the project at this point, right? I usually try a little bit of downside and a little bit of upside. Currently, people are struggling with this, and our application doesn't do a great job of addressing it. And then when we're done, here's what we expect to happen: more retention, faster adoption, whatever we actually think we're gonna move the needle on, right? Typically, we end up going through just a series of breadboards. That's as far as we take the solution in terms of resolution. The only exception would be like if we've, in the shaping process, encountered something specific about a UI element that is like, we know that this could go a lot of different directions and people could really get distracted on it. We'll sort of nail that down. We'll go through the breadboarding. We'll basically go through an explicit section of what is out of scope. So this is another area that's hard to anticipate when you're shaping because you're out of the cycle. But we know that when we draw a boundary around this project, there are natural tentacles into other things. And a lot of times what we have is institutional knowledge across the org. Like, well, we're working on this, but right next to it is this other thing that everybody knows could be better. So we make sure just to guard the team from bleeding over into working on that. And then the last piece that we have is basically known risks, right? So we've worked with our core team. We understand what's going on. These are the things we need to be especially mindful of. And these are the things that could sort of take us out if we don't nail them. A lot of times I think the teams use that list as their jumping off point. So it'll point them at sort of the epicenter of the project to say, let me go dive into that, understand how that piece of code works, and then sort of work our way out from there.
Got it.
We typically we do these pitches live. So the way we like to do it is we almost leave the document back. We start with a conversation, and it's usually one of us standing in front of a whiteboard, just explaining, like, does the problem make sense? Here's a high level of the solution. Do you get kind of where we're going? People can get questions, out of their heads. And then we typically start to draw the breadboards live so people can see the solution evolve in front of them, as opposed to having a complete map and trying to absorb, the entire thing end to end. So we'll do an hour to an hour and a half, get the entire thing out of our head and set the team on their way.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. And you brought a very interesting point, which is, for me, it's essential when you're working with these kind of things, which is constraint. In the form of enabling constraint. I've seen, for example, in ShapeUp, a lot of them, like, circuit breaker, different things, like, for example, scopes. At the end of the day, there's a way also to try to, to constrain everything. The thing that you're putting on the pitch is also the thing that, hey, what are the things that we are not going to do? So you are taking those out of the scope, and you try to focus specifically on what matters. Anyone that you have come up, or one that you wanted to comment that have helped you a lot, especially with product teams?
I think the biggest one is the one that you touched on, which is the understanding across our organization that the team that is doing the delivery gets to manage scope. Ryan has this wonderful phrase that he uses, which is scope grows like grass.
Yeah.
So it's not anything that anyone's doing. Like it's not, sometimes it's the CEO that comes in, hey, you're working on this, you got to do this and this too. But sometimes it's just, we're living in the project for 6 weeks and we encounter so many things that, like, well, I don't like the way this select box works, or I don't like the way this image is. And you just end up sort of piling it up. And I think what we've been able to do is form discipline around the fact that 6 weeks is 6 weeks. Whatever the appetite is the appetite. And the team, after going through a couple cycles, starts to gain the understanding that ship does mean shipped. They understand what the objective is, and they are ultimately in control of scope, and they can cut things back. And not only the things that surface through the project, but things that were in the pitch, right? We have a lot of conversations about, it's 3 weeks in, hey guys, we know we described it this way. We found a little bit of a different way to do it. We're 3 weeks out. We think this is the least risky way to do it. We're still going to be able to accomplish the objective. And the fantastic thing is you're talking to the expert, right? These are people who know interface design and interactions better than anybody else. These are people that know the code. And in most times we're saying, go for it. Just let's scope it down, get to the solution that you had come up with in the cycle and move through. Without that constraint, we're back to the situation that we were describing about the roadmap, right? Any period of time will have new scope introduced. So I have shrinking timelines. I have uncertainty that I haven't managed. And now I have people saying, oh my gosh, I heard you're working on this part of the app. I hope you do A, B, and C. And I'm once again a failure because, oh, you shipped that thing, but you didn't get that extra stuff in there. And like, I can't win even if I do launch on time, right? So just getting the discipline into the product management and into the teams that de-scoping is the right thing to do. And then getting that discipline sort of shared across the organization to say, we don't work in a way where 6 weeks kind of means something, but if they ship in 8 or if they ship in 10, that's fine. So let's pile some extra things in there. They get to succeed or they get to fail. And that's a very real constraint. You do that a couple times, you get in that habit and things start to work really well.
Yeah, a phrase that I use, or a quote that I used to, phrase a lot to the people who are working on the try to do, especially because engineers, they love to do the things over and over again. So when they try to say refactoring, I just care a little bit because you can refactor one thing and then the other day, if I tell you you're gonna refactor that again, so it's like an endless circle. So one of the phrases that I try to use is the best is the enemy of the good. Yes. So and I think that Ryan also, does a very good job explaining that I don't want the perfect thing. I just want the thing that improves the thing that we used to have before, right? Yes. So it's like, but I think that it's very difficult for people who try to be, they're perfectionists or they like these kind of things, to understand this concept as, hey, we are shipping something that is not, with the enough quality. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we're, deliver something.
I think the view that ShapeUp affords us allows people to make trade-offs at the right level. So we've talked in the past about the paper shredder, right? Yeah. So I've done projects before where I have this entire, I have invoicing. I want to create recurring invoicing, right? Mm-hmm. We have somebody write up a pitch or a story or set of stories, and we put it through a system where a bunch of cards are created, right? Now I'm a developer and I'm staring at this one card, right? Which is this endpoint does this function. You need to add these 3 things to it, right? But all I understand are the things that were just given to me, right? So I'm operating in a place where it'd be very easy. I got a couple hours to go do this. Like I'm going to make this the best it can be. And you're doing that across card after card after card, but the integration isn't happening when the trade-offs are being made, right? So to give a group of engineers a picture of the entire thing and have them say, it's not every API that you need to refactor and cut the response time down in half. It's, are we actually providing the experience we need to provide and providing the feature we need to provide? What are the things that you really need to nail, and what are the things that you can sort of push to the back? And by the way, it's 30 working days. That's all we've got, and then we're gone from this thing. So I think allowing teams to make decisions at that level and be very aware of what they need to work well and what they can, sort of just get by with. None of us want to admit that's how the world works, but that's how the world works,
Exactly. It's fantastic, man. We have almost like an hour. It's time flies. Before we wrap up, Chris, I just want to ask you one more thing. That is basically, also one of the episodes of the Demand Thinking, which is this concept of Slapdash meeting. Could you elaborate on that? Because I think that I've been in those kind of meetings before, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I think we've laid the groundwork for this question, right? So it centers around a supply conversation or a demand conversation. So in a previous role, I remember very clearly this situation where we got into a conversation around SLAs, right? Mm-hmm. And we were in a panic mode because we had been marching towards building a piece of software that met a set of SLA requirements. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden we realized that something was not performing at a level that it needed to perform at, right? Mm-hmm. And like anything, we're dealing with a user interaction that had to load under a certain period of time. And we went directly into, this is where you have the reflex, right? We're so good at solutioning We say like, well, we could do this on the supply side, or this on the server side, this on the client side. Let's take away these filters from this list. Let's do pagination. Let's do let's do all these different things. And you get into a situation where everybody is looking around the table saying, do we really know how this specific thing creates value to a bunch of different users? And because nobody studies software at that level of interaction, everyone's saying no. And then so we're getting to a place saying, okay, we're going to meet the SLA, but are we going to destroy what we've built here in the process? And because we're under such a time crunch, we end up saying like, here's the best thing we've got. Let's go ship it. Like usually the most important person in the room, CTO, is going to say, make the call, ship it tomorrow, and let's blow through this. And you end up leaving the room just feeling horribly. The thing that I've learned time and time again is if you can come up for air, come up for a breath in those meetings and say, I know we want to get to a decision in half an hour. Can you give me a couple hours to go actually figure out the requirements here and just double down and make sure that we understand at a detailed level what we're trying to accomplish? We get out of these slapdash decisions that can destroy value. A lot of times it's like, a lot of us aren't lawyers. Have we read the SLA language correctly? Are we interpreting this correctly? And do we really know what we need to meet or what we don't need to meet, right? If it's a big customer, they said calendar. Do we really know what calendar means? Can we go back and interrogate that more? So I think, like I always say, I live on the demand side of product development. I'm constantly trying to pull myself in that direction, saying, I'd really love to spend my time doing artificial intelligence and machine learning and blockchain and all the cool whiz-bang stuff, but I really need to go talk to the users and the customers and focus a lot of attention there.
Got it. Oh man, it's been fantastic. I mean, and before we close, Chris, anything that you can recommend to people besides from, of course, ShapeUp, but something you mentioned also that you are working a lot with Bob Moesta. Something that you want to, when you kind of book training that people, that we could help people to, get them more into the demand side rather than into the supply side.
I think Competing Against Luck, if your listeners have not read Competing Against Luck by Clay Christensen, it's probably the best primer for how to get into jobs to be done. So if you're in a situation where you have all the struggles, right? My engineers don't feel that great because they're behind on every deadline. I don't feel that great because I'm constantly throwing things into the cycle and I'm not sure what's going to pay off and what isn't. And you want to try ShapeUp. Taking a look at Competing Against Luck will give you the baseline understanding of jobs. The other thing, and without being too self-promotional, Bob and I do have an online course to learn the interview technique and the intricacies of jobs to be done. It's definitely worth checking out. Forgive me, it's years old, so I'll look. But all the theory applies. It breaks down the forces diagram, the timeline, the interview technique. So if you get through Competing Against Luck, which is a good read because it's all case studies, it's fun to read about product development if you're in this thing, and you say, I really want to get good at this technique, that online course will get you pretty far down the path.
Awesome.
And then you got to just start talking to users.
Awesome. How people can find you, Chris? If they have any questions about, just to be done or the way that you are using ShapeUp out of books.
Yeah, Twitter is probably the easiest. I'm Chris CBS, Charlie Bravo Sam, on Twitter, and they can find me there.
Awesome, perfect. I will put all these kind of resources and things on when I upload the video to YouTube. So it's great.
Awesome.
So Chris, thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure. Let's keep in touch and have an awesome day.
Absolutely. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah.